Welcome to Retro Video Playback and to episode 22 of Tape Talk Tuesday. This week I'm looking at a movie that's hard to believe was actually released on VHS, Old School. Old School was released in 2003, so roughly 3 years before the end of major movies being released on VHS. It's hard to believe it was released on VHS because unlike so many movies from the early 2000s, Old School doesn't feel like 2003 to me. There are certainly some aspects about the movie that maybe haven't aged well, mostly jokes that may be considered bad taste now in 2025, but overall it's a movie that I watch, and the fact that it's over 20 years old doesn't tend to register or stand out. And I think there are a lot of movies that you could say that about, but even more movies that do feel their age. It helps that Old School is a comedy, and not a sci-fi movie or something similar that relied on CGI and other visuals that haven't aged well. Old School is a part of a group of movies that I would put into a subgenre of comedy. It's a subgenre that existed for some time, going back to the famous 70s and 80s movies like Animal House and Caddyshack, but really proliferated in the late 90s and into the 2000s. You could further classify some of the movies into additional subgenres like teen comedies, which would include movies like American Pie, Can't Hardly Wait, and Superbad, and stoner comedies like Pineapple Express and Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. But in the end, they all fall under the label, in one way or another, of raunchy comedies. Basically, they're just R-rated comedies, and along with Old School and the others I noted, we're talking movies like Wedding Crashers, Van Wilder, and The Hangover, which, released in 2009, some cite as the true final raunchy R-rated comedy. It's a subgenre that really blew up in the 2000s, but then, seemingly, as quickly as it appeared, it went away. And if we're in agreement that The Hangover was the last true raunchy R-rated comedy, we're already 16 years removed. The Hangover was directed by Todd Phillips, who also directed 2019's Joker, but also directed Old School. That was my clumsy transition to move the discussion focus back to the movie at hand. Taking a look at the front cover of Old School on VHS, it features the three primary characters in the movie played by Luke Wilson, Will Ferrell, and Vince Vaughn. To affirm for the potential audience that the movie they're looking at is a raunchy R-rated comedy, Will Ferrell is holding a blow-up doll. Above the characters is the actors' names, and below them is the movie title, Old in a bold collegiate font, and School in a bold font that I think is supposed to look like chalk. And following a trend that so many movies did in the 2000s, we've got a big unrated banner. Basically a movie's way of saying that it has some crude jokes, a few F-bombs, and maybe a bit of nudity. Old School has all of this. While Will Ferrell is in the center of the cover, I'd say he's in the movie the least amount of all three of these actors, though maybe it's close between he and Vince Vaughn. But in 2003, he was likely the most famous of the trio, and that often determined, and still determines, placement on posters and media covers. Meanwhile, Luke Wilson, despite leading this movie and doing it well, of the three actors on this cover, he's probably the least recognizable. He works a lot with almost 100 acting credits to his name, but I don't think he's quite as recognizable as his Old School co-stars, often just thought of as Owen Wilson's brother. And for Vince Vaughn, this movie was sort of a launching point for the trajectory of his career for a while. Before appearing in Old School, the only comedy of note he was in was Zoolander, and even then it was a minor role where he was basically silent. He was in some good movies before Old School, but nothing like what came after it, including both supporting and leading roles. Starsky and Hutch, Anchorman, Dodgeball, Wedding Crashers, The Breakup, Couples Retreat, Four Christmases, The Watch, and The Internship. After that last one in 2013, I'd say his career changed a bit, but those movies I listed, while not all exactly the same per se, I would say that Vince Vaughn plays a very similar character in all of them, and I fully support it. I can appreciate that not everyone enjoys Vince Vaughn and his shtick, but I am one of those people who still finds it funny to this day. The top features the same Old School logo from the front cover. It makes another appearance on the spines of the box along with the headshot of Will Ferrell, the same image from the front, and another unrated notice. At the top is a DreamWorks logo, which, I don't know why, but anytime I see DreamWorks, my mind assumes it's related to a kid's movie because of DreamWorks Animation, but DreamWorks Pictures has released plenty of non-animated films, from war movies like Saving Private Ryan in 1917, to adult comedies like Meet the Parents and Old School. The back of the box starts out with a quote, "Rude, raucous, and outrageous," from Gannett newspapers. This is followed by the write-up. Get ready for the unrated and out-of-control version of Old School that you couldn't see in theaters. What's a guy supposed to do when he catches the early flight home and finds his girlfriend in bed with a room full of naked strangers? Not entirely accurate, she's alone in bed and there's two people in the bathroom, but anyway. Return to college and start a fraternity. Before you can say wild and wet wrestling, Frank the Tank, Will Ferrell, Saturday Night Live, Mitch, Luke Wilson, Legally Blonde, and Beanie, Vince Vaughn, Swingers, have their own frat raging with out-of-control antics. But when things get too wild, the dean sets out to shut them down. The laughs are top of the class, even if you guys aren't, in the hit comedy from director Todd Phillips, Road Trip. To the left of the write-up is a shot from the movie of Will Ferrell with a dart in his neck, and a shot of Juliette Lewis, which doesn't make sense to me because she's barely in the movie, only appearing for a couple of minutes in the opening sequence. But like Will Ferrell, I assume she was well known at the time, and therefore a draw for audiences. I guess that's justification for being on the box. Below is a large image of Will Ferrell in a pool of jelly with some other characters, including topless women. So basically, the box art for Old School on VHS is a prime example of doing everything it can to draw in audiences using all of the strategies, similar to a YouTube thumbnail. It features Will Ferrell not once, but 5 times, despite not being the main character, so obviously capitalizing on his at-the-time popularity. Then it really tries to sell the fact that it's a raunchy R-rated comedy with the unrated notices on the front cover and the spines, the quote at the top of the backside, and the image of the topless women. Now, I'm not necessarily criticizing this design because I'd say it's well done and it represents the movie for what it is, but it does really serve as a good example of strategies that are used to try and get audiences to watch a movie. The tape itself is simple with an inked-on design. Unlike so many movies, it actually contains a logo for the movie title with the same fonts as the box. My copy also features a Be Kind, Please Rewind sticker because it was formerly a Rogers video rental tape. With its big block letters and bright and bold blue background, say that 5 times fast, Old School on VHS really stands out. Whether it's a good movie or not is up to you. For me, it's a solid comedy, probably one of my favorite comedies, and while I said at the top of the video that it's hard to believe it's on VHS, I'm glad that it is. It fits in so well with other comedies of the time, and because it's a comedy that isn't relying on visuals throughout the movie, it's a great watch on VHS. With that, we find ourselves at the end of our discussion of Old School on VHS, and the end of episode 22 of Tape Talk Tuesday. Thanks for watching Retro Video Playback.